Hey, I just want to quickly respond to, we just got through the 9/11 anniversary, and there's a lot of speculation out there as usual, and there's a lot of theories, a lot of conspiracy theories and such. And what you find in all the conspiracy theories is that they do the science, and the science does confuse them because nothing adds up naturally. And I think you can see right now, by me saying that, where I'm going with this. Though the whale that God prepared for Jonah, was that just a natural creation that could be explained by science? Where you've heard biologists, marine biologists talk about, how could this whale do this and that and the other thing because whales don't do this or that or whatever. You can't explain it naturally because the whale or the great fish that God prepared for Jonah was a supernatural creation, a supernatural preparation. He did it. He made a special exception in this creation for Jonah. The gourd that he prepared, it's probably very unique, probably the only gourd like it ever in the history of the world. When God does things, they tend to go outside of science, so-called. And you don't study God or what God has done through science, generally speaking. It's just a matter of God did it. When 9/11 took place, that entire thing had to do with George Bush messing with Israel and going to bring in a land for peace agreement. And the day of 9/11 was the day that he was supposed to get together with Arafat and sign that thing and mess over the Jews. So God had been preparing these Allah-worshipping Arab terrorists to be pilots and to be very good pilots and to be very skilled at being able to pull off the job that they did and to be able to fly into those twin towers. The whole thing didn't make sense from just a natural perspective. Well, how were they able to do this? And how were they able to get away with it? And when the FBI had certain information, why didn't they act upon it? And why? Why did just the fuel from these jets turn this special structural steel into powder and so on and so forth? Well, it didn't. None of that stuff, if you study it from just a natural scientific perspective, rather than looking at it as a Bible believer, you will say there must have been a government conspiracy, there must have been plastic explosives or some kind of special weapon that dissolved the steel or whatever it was. Don't be like the so-called scientists looking for, with the Hadron Collider, looking for the particle, the physical particle that holds matter together. They're looking for a particle. They think there's something, if you go deep down into the quarks and the nuance and all these different little muons and whatever, eventually they're going to find some physical particle that explains dark matter and explains the God particle and why everything is held together and why the atoms are held together and they don't blow apart. They'll never find it. You know why? Because the God particle is not a particle. It's not physical at all. Everything is held together by the word of his power. It's spiritual. It's supernatural. So if you try and study the whole thing that they're doing with the Hadron Collider and you're trying to find that the so-called Higgs boson, when Higgs didn't discover anything and there's no such thing as a boson, you'll never arrive at a conclusion. You'll be chasing a ghost for the rest of your life. Literally chasing a ghost, because it's the Holy Ghost that holds everything together, and they can't find it. You're not going to be able to see it unless you have spiritual eyes. eyes that God has given you to be able to look through his word and see things that the natural man cannot see and he's blind to. 9/11 is no different. That building came down the way that it did. Those buildings came down the way they did because it was a supernatural act. God brought those towers down. And we don't have time to get into a whole big study on, why God brings down the high towers and how he prophesied that he would do that, and how it's connected with Israel and the land and the everlasting covenant. Don't have time to get into that. But the reason why 9/11 doesn't make any sense from the physical standpoint, from the science, is because it's supernatural. It's not natural science, it's supernatural science. And once you understand that as a Bible believer, then you get it. Oh, this is how the pilots were able to get away with what they got away with. This is how they were able to overcome these, 757s with nothing but box knives. This is how they were able to do this and that and the other thing. And all of our special agencies like the FBI had their hands tied and just couldn't do anything. It's because God had their hands tied. How were those jets able to bring down those twin towers? And how was it that they were able to bring down building number 3 or whatever? It's because it was supernatural. It was zapped by God. And you'll never figure it out. You'll spend the rest of your life studying and trying to figure out what really happened. Was it the Israelis that were behind it? Was it the U.S. government? Was it the nations combined in some evil agreement? You'll never figure it out. You'll never figure it out unless you realize that it was a supernatural event by God. God simply brought those towers down, and when he does something, the physics get bent, buddy. Physics aren't even a factor at that point. He simply does things that don't make sense. How did Lazarus come out of the grave after 4 days and not stink the place up? And I mean, you know what happens after you've been dead 4 days? One of the first things is your eyes collapse. Your all of your tendons and you are rotting. You are gone, man. Yet he walked out of the place and went and ate with them. I mean, he was fine. How do you explain that from a physical standpoint? You don't. You don't naturally explain it. It's a supernatural event. How is God going to resurrect you? Let's say you die and before the Lord comes and you're cremated and they scatter your ashes out in some river, because you have a heathen family that doesn't believe in a proper burial. And those ashes are spread out into a river, and they go down to the ocean, and some winds up on the riverbank, some winds up as silt at the bottom of the river, some goes out and gets eaten by fish or whatever. Well, how's God going to possibly resurrect that body? He resurrects your body. How does he do that? You can't explain it naturally or physically. It's a supernatural event that God does. You call yourself a Bible believer? The explanation for 9/11 is not something you're going to study in a book. You're not going to study through physics. You're going to study it through the Bible.